Hey everybody, today I would like to talk with you a little bit about our bodies. You know, God was kind enough to give each of us a body, and today I would like to share with you what I believe are three essentials for taking care of the body that God gave us without turning it into an object of worship. You may remember there was a story in the Bible years ago where the devil was tempting Jesus and promised him all the kingdoms of the earth if Jesus would just bow down and worship him. And Jesus responded to the devil by saying that it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve only him. And so really, when we think of these bodies that we've been given and what a blessing they are, we really need to also keep in mind what they're really meant to be used for and not get those two things switched around. So today I'd like to share with you what I think are the three essentials for taking care of the body that God has given us without turning it into an object of worship. And the first essential has to do with perspective. Now, you know, a long time ago when I was in catechism class, it was toward the end of the 2 years right before confirmation, and the pastor handed to each of us a long list of Bible verses and invite us to look through that list and pick what would be our confirmation verse. This would be the kind of the verse that defines us, I guess you could say. And I was a little in awe of that task, and as I was looking through the verses, I guess I wanted the perfect one, and none of them really seemed to line up quite right. And then I stumbled across this one that I really hadn't seen before. And at the time it seemed a little odd, and yet for whatever reason appropriate. And I guess it was years later till it really fully made sense to me, but I was drawn to 1 Timothy 4, verse 8. And that verse in the Old King James version that I originally memorized it in said, "For bodily exercise profiteth little, but godliness is profitable unto all things, having the promise of life that now is, and of that which is to come." Some of the modern translations say, physical training is of some value, but godliness is of surpassing value. Again, referring to the life that God can give us when this life has concluded. And that's a really important perspective, that first essential, to keep in mind, because no matter what the condition of our body is, this earthly one, it is still a temporary one, and it's also not ultimately under our control. I mean, there's a lot that we can do for it and to take care of it, and I will certainly be sharing some things that I think are helpful in that regard. But as a pastor, I know as well as anyone does, from having observed it over the years and also having experienced it personally, there are things beyond our control in relation to our bodies, and we just cannot be guaranteed that they're always going to function at their tip-top shape, even if we've done everything quote-unquote right, because that's just the way life is. Accidents happen, diseases come upon us without any warning. Even a procedure like I ran through just several months ago, when out of the blue a piece of tissue in my abdomen somehow or another got itself wrapped around a part of my small intestine and required emergency surgery and 7 days in the hospital and 4 weeks of recovery, and all of that went as smooth as silk, and I'm pleased to be here today and in great shape yet. But, you know, I couldn't predict that kind of thing, and I was a good healthy eater and certainly a good exerciser as well, and I know other people who have run into similar circumstances. So this physical training or this bodily exercise that I will be encouraging is of some value, there's no doubt about it, but it pales in comparison with godliness, recognizing oneself as a child of God, loved by this same Lord Jesus Christ, who was crucified, died, and rose again on our behalf. So perspective, I believe, is the first essential in taking care of the body that God gave us without turning it into an object of worship. The second essential is diligence. So while the perspective reminds us that we can't control everything, diligence reminds us to take care of that which we can control. Diligence is the ability to just dig in and have the fortitude to say, I am going to do what I am able to do to take care of this gift that God has given me. Now, I learned this in kind of an interesting way several years ago, probably 15 or more years ago, when I was home during a family reunion time, and my brother-in-law from out of state was home as well, and we were spending a little time in my parents' house. And back then, I got up one morning to do some exercising, and so I went to the living room, and I was just stretching out a little bit before getting ready to take a morning run. And while I was down there stretching out, my brother-in-law Randy came down. By the way, he is often given permission to share this story, so I'm not telling any tales out of school. But Randy came downstairs. He's about 10 years older than me, a very witty guy, and he was just kind of getting started for the morning. He went into the kitchen, got a cup of coffee, came into the living room, sat down on the chair. I'm down here just stretching out, and he's looking at me kind of quizzically, and so finally, I said, well, I could see those wheels turning in his head, and I said, what are you thinking about? And he looked at me, and he set down his coffee cup, and he scratched his chin, and he says, well, I was just wondering whether I should start exercising so I could look like you, or whether I should just wait 10 years and see whether you look like me. And I thought that was just an amazing statement. We laughed about it at the time because it was certainly very witty. He was a little pudgy at the time, as he would readily admit. But I also thought there was a lot of wisdom in that saying, because we all know people who were exceptional athletes in high school, college, maybe even professionally, and sometimes some of them we see later and they've just allowed themselves to just kind of degenerate physically. They've put on a lot of weight, and they just are a shadow of their former sense of good health. And so that's when I was reminded by his comment, that our physical condition is not so much determined by what we have done, but by what we are willing to do day after day after day. So diligence, I believe, is an essential part of taking care of the body that God gave us, yet without turning it into an object of worship. And then finally, the last thing that I believe we need, because even if you've got perspective, and even if we've got diligence, the last piece, and a very important piece, is to have a system. I've always been a very spontaneous kind of guy for most of my life, but the older I get, the more and more convinced I become that while spontaneity is a wonderful thing, it is systems that allow good to be done over the course of time. It's systems in place that allow us to function at a much higher level than what we're able to function just grabbing this and grabbing that and going after this fad and going after this fad and all the rest. It's being able to kind of systemize some things in life. Now, we don't systemize everything for sure, but we can put ourselves in a position through our system to be in a better position to be able to do good. In football, what they're doing these days is they're starting systems younger and younger, and they're letting the kids get to know the system for how their particular team operates, the kind of plays that they run and all the rest. So by the time they get into high school, they know the system well, and they can perform at a higher level because they know what it is they're really trying to do. And you certainly see that in the college and professional level as well. So a system, I believe, is the third essential to taking care of the body that God gave us without turning it into an object of worship. Now, for me, in regard to my physical health, I have two systems that I have in place. The first system has to do with nutrition. And there's nothing really particularly fancy about this system, but it's effective. And it's largely rooted on a little 7-word mantra that came from Michael Poulin, who said, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. That's what he said. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. And when he speaks in terms of eating food, what he refers to is eating real food. In other words, not processed food or overly processed food, but as close as we can get to kind of the nature's way of providing it. Now, you can take that to extremes that I'm not really willing to take things to, but really that whole idea of, choosing the baked potato, for example, over the potato chip. One is certainly more healthy than the other. The French fries probably somewhere in between. But that's the kind of thing that I try to work with. And one of the things I've noticed in regard to nutrition, and this is true of other things in life, the earlier it is in the day, the more control we have over our life, essentially. So I can control pretty easily what I'm going to put in my body right away when the day starts. So the first thing I do is take a big glass of water, usually a close to a 16-ounce glass, and I just drink that down right away because, you know, my body's been starving for 6 to 8 hours, depending on what the night's sleep was. Or the other night it was 4.5. You know, that's how it goes sometimes. But I want to replenish the body that has been starving, and then I start out with a good, healthy breakfast, which for me is actually the same breakfast every day. It's kind of you'd think I'd get tired of it, but so far I haven't, and I've been doing it for a good 7 or so years, which for me is raw oats put into, raw rolled oats, I should say, not the kind you get at the elevator, but the kind you get in the store, raw oats, topped with flaxseed or flaxseed ground and raisins, and then I pour milk over the top and eat it like cereal. And that provides me a nice, slow release carbohydrate. I get the omega-6s that are in the flaxseed, and I get the fruit serving that is in the raisins, and then I get protein and calcium in the milk. So it's just a good, healthy way for me to start out the day. And I know if nothing else goes well nutritionally, I at least started it out well. Then I like to have a smoothie about mid-morning. Sometimes I'll make those at home and take them with me to work, or if I'm going into work later in the day because I've got evening meetings and whatnot, I'll still make the smoothie at home and either drink it there or drink it on the way in. But for me, a smoothie, the most common recipe is about a half a cup of milk and about a third or a half a cup of Greek yogurt, handful of almonds, and then I add in a selection of frozen fruit, usually some strawberries, a few blackberries, maybe some pineapple, whatever I've got on hand, and almost always a half a banana. And then what shocks a lot of people, but I also put in a full cup of frozen spinach. And I know people are like, oh, spinach, but I'm telling you, if it's frozen, you can't taste it. And if you've got dark berries in the mix, you won't even be able to see it until maybe later if it happens to thaw out and the green pigment comes through. But you can't taste it. It's a great way to get raw vegetables right in early in the day. And so that's the next piece. And then from there on, you know, it just depends what I'm making or whatnot, but I try to make as much food as I can at home. If I eat out, and we end up going to the dollar menu quite a bit in our world because we're running here and there, but if I get a sandwich, I'll get it plain. So take off all those condiments and all that stuff. Just keep it as raw as you can. Maybe put on some tomato or lettuce, something of that nature. And keep it simple, keep it plain, and then try to get as many other vegetables in as we can. So I'm not as good as getting mostly plants in that Michael recommends. I've got a fair amount of meat in my diet, which is fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but moderation, and that's the system. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. I've got a sweet tooth, as many of you know, but I try to still keep that proportionate to everything else that I'm trying to put into my body. So that's my system, if you will, for nutrition, and if that's helpful to you, I'm quite happy to share it. And then finally, a system for exercise. And you know, there are all kinds of systems out there. Some people like to run, some people like to lift weights, some people like to do jazzercise or some kind of Zumba or one of those new things. A lot of people like to order the various fitness kits and opportunities that you have on the internet, the P90Xs and the Insanities, and just to name a few. And there's Body for Life by Bill Phillips and other great programs out there. And I don't have anything against any of those. But after having done a number of different things over the years, as it turned out, I found some dissatisfaction with each of those, things I liked, things I didn't like. And last summer I just decided some things came together in my mind, and I actually designed my own system. One of those, I guess, if you want something done right, do it yourself, or at least something that seemed to work best for me. I'm a busy guy. I don't want to spend my life doing exercise, but I do want it to be an important part of my life. So I don't want to worship my body, but I do want to take care of it because it's a gift of God, and I also want it to be well enough, to the extent that I have ability to control that, well enough so that I can function in the other ways that God provides for me to be involved in this world. So I want to be able to keep a good solid level of energy up. I want to physically be able to do what I need to be able to do. So I need this tool of my body to work well. But by the same token, I don't want to spend all day doing maintenance, so to speak. I want to be able to get in and get it done. So my system actually is quite surprising, but I think it would stack up with any of the other ones that you see out there on the market today. I call it 9 minutes to fit. And basically what it amounts to is it's 9 minutes of exercise every day, and that's all I exercise, believe it or not. Sometimes a little 5 or 6 minute warm-up as well, but my main exercise is 9 minutes, and actually in reality I only exercise for about 3 of those 9 minutes intensely. The rest of the time is actual rest, but it's still a fabulous workout, and I could tell you more about that. And in fact, this is going to be a segment set up in 2 pieces, so I'll tell you more about that program in a separate video. If you're interested, you can click that. If you feel like you've heard all you want to hear, then that's fine as well. But essentially, 9 Minutes to Fit involves 12 rounds of exercise that include 18 seconds of work and 27 seconds of rest. And we do that routine 12 times with a whole variety of workouts over the course of many days. And it can challenge the most physical fit among us, but it also can easily be adapted to people at the very beginning of the beginning of the fitness scale, so to speak. Folks that haven't worked out in a long time can ease their way into this program quite easily. So if you want to hear more about that, you certainly can. But the essentials for taking care of our body without turning it into a body of worship is to have perspective, and to have diligence, and then also to have systems. And I believe God is gracious enough to help us find and discover all 3 of those things. And it's really important to keep all of that in mind. I read a quote earlier this morning from Leonard Sweet, who's just a wonderful Methodist pastor who teaches at I think George Fox University. Very well-read person, and he was mentioning today that God conceived of him, but his parents conceived him. Let me say that again. God conceived of him, but his parents conceived him. And I think what that points out is we need both. We need to think of things that we are going to do in this world, but thinking about them won't cut the mustard. It doesn't finish the project. Eventually you have to actually do it. And so when we talk about having perspective, we think about it, we have a perspective, and we put that perspective in action in terms of the way in which we interact in the world. And diligence is one of the ways that we put that faith, if you will, into action, expressing it in the opportunities that, or through the opportunities that God gives us, and developing systems so that can happen more regularly, more automatically. That's kind of what it's all about too. So the system I have is something I can do anytime, anywhere, with little or any equipment, whether I'm traveling, whether I'm at home. I don't have to go to a gym or anything like that. It's just a system I've developed, and if you're interested in learning more, you can. In fact, I'll give you a week's worth of workouts if you'd like to check those out as well in part 2 of the video. But thanks for checking in. I pray that as you go about the task and the opportunity of taking care of the body that God has given you, that you might have perspective and diligence and a system too. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, have a great day and stay fit.